Hello, yeah, I'm Yehuda Geberer, and I'm here with my good friend, Reb Moshe Yarmish, the famous, legendary photographer of great rabbinic leaders, Gedolei Yisrael. And I want to thank you, Amudim, for the great opportunity to be back here at this special Amudim event. It's great to be back for a second year, and if Amudim invited us back for a second year, then I guess it's an even more cause for excitement. And it's really a privilege to be here together with the photographer legend Moshe Yarmish for the segment Behind the Camera, part 2.0. So we had part one last year, which was very well received, and it's still archived on the Amudim website, I believe. So if you remembered from last year and liked it, or if you're curious about it, we had some fantastic stories about these really amazing pictures and the history and the personalities associated with them. We're here for part two. It's mostly new material. There's a couple of personalities who might be familiar from last year, but there's new stories, a new angle, and mostly new Gedolei Yisrael altogether. The stories and the history behind these historic pictures of great rabbinical leaders is something that can be seen through pictures. The cliche goes, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And it's not just a cliche, it's actually true, and it's worth far more than 1,000 words. So I'm happy that you'll all join us here. I'm Yehuda Geberer, a historian, tour guide, and host of the Jewish History Soundbites podcast, together with legendary Gedolim photographer Moshe Yarmish. And we're all happy that you're here to join us on behalf of Amudim as we embark on a photographic and historical, exciting journey together. So what we're going to do is the pictures, which are worth more than 1,000 words because they form a historical record. They are able to tell a story. They make it more alive, more relevant. They give it context. And there's all kinds of associations with each picture, and it adds so much more color than any text in the world could. And that's why it's so much better to tell a story through a picture. Why? So that's the answer why we're doing with pictures instead of just reading a text. But why Moshe Yarmish? That's the next question. Because there's many people who have photographed great rabbis, great Torah leaders, great Gedolei Yisrael over the years. But there's a certain uniqueness to the images that you have captured, especially in the pre-digital age. I think that's what's most important about your work, in that it was more focused, and it was more, I remember you describing last year about how you'd go out on specific journeys to obtain certain pictures at certain moments. And therefore, your stories, more than others, perhaps have an even more exciting and fun story to tell. So I think we're ready to go. And we'll go right ahead with the first picture. So let's start with this picture, Rabbi Avigdor Miller, one of the greatest rabbinical leaders, rabbis in the United States scene over the 20th century, lived a long and fruitful life. And his popularity seems to grow following his passing, as so many people listen to his audio lectures on every conceivable topic. The man was a genius who literally covered every facet of both Torah and scientific and general knowledge. So what can you tell us about the picture that you took here?
Okay, Rav Avigdor Miller, there happened to be a Hachnasas Sefer Torah. I think it was given to his son's yeshiva, Rav Shmuel Miller. He used to have a son who passed away, I think, during COVID recently. But it was written, they were writing it in the house by somebody by the name Feldman. It happened to be right here in Flatbush, and it's interesting because he used to walk a lot. His yeshiva was, he was like, I think, on Avenue R in Ocean Parkway, and I think he used to walk almost every single day, miles. I think the destination was pretty much his son's, where his son used to live, which was pretty much close to like a mile away. And there was many pictures. I'm not the only one who took pictures of him on the street. There were many people on Avenue J in Flatbush. I don't know if these are familiar with people who are listening. You would see him many times just walking the streets. He would, he would take a long, leisurely walk. There's famous picture of him looking at, there used to be a New York Times stand on one of these corners. And he's like, there's a picture of him like bending down even just to see the latest whatever. But he had to take a tremendous amount of, a lot of walking. It happens to be that he was coming from this Hachnas Sefer Torah where he wrote an ice into the Sefer Torah, and he was just walking to wherever he was walking to. I captured his, walking on the street. He happened to put his hand up. It looks like he was like waving to me. It wasn't. I just happened to capture the moment. And this picture has been very, wildly popular for Victor Miller fans. It's just, it's colorful. It's nice. He's smiling. It's outside. It's just, it was so-called one of the best sellers. What can I say?
Yeah, and I can see why. Also, a few of the things you said, especially the last thing about his smile. He was, in many ways, a very serious individual. He took things and topics very seriously, and when you hear him speak, he has a very, a certain intensity to him, and not to make light of things. Everything was a topic, was a sugya, was something to dissect and analyze, and therefore to get that lightness to him, to that smile, that warmth, which brings out the other side of his personality, because he was an incredibly fatherly individual. Like I emphasized, although he did serve as a mashgiach in a yeshiva in Chaim Berlin for about 2 decades, for close to 20 years, for most of his life he was a pulpit rabbi. He was a rabbi in Chelsea, Massachusetts for a couple of years, and then for many, many years in Brooklyn, Rugby, and then in Flatbush. And he was a leader of people, of families, and he built them up. So this is someone who definitely had much warmth and much of a smile to him, and to be able to get that on camera was that's what I like best about the picture. Also about the walking, the other thing you said also it resonated with me was the walking. He's someone who was somewhat known for his walks, both because he put such an emphasis on the health aspect of it, about his exercise, and how important it is, and be out in the fresh air. And he made his life's mission to live the Shar HaBchina of the Chayvus HaLevavos, the looking around the world around us, the natural world, the physical world, the animal kingdom, the astronomy, the Neflayos HaBayre, to look and see God and see everything about it, the Marabu Masecha Hashem. And he saw it in the simplest things. So even on his daily walks, he talked about sunlight and air and water, the things that we really take for granted, not just how an ant builds a colony underground. But beyond that, he was a student of Slobodka. He was someone who grew up in Baltimore, went to New York to learn in Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan, which became Yeshiva College, Yeshiva University at the time he was there. And then he gets exposed to Rabbi Isaac Sher, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in Slobodka, and he comes to fundraise in the United States during the interwar period. And Rabbi Victor Miller gets enraptured by him and goes on a boat, and he's off, this American boy, to learn in Lithuania, in Slobodka. He stays there for 6-7 years, becomes an incredible student there, very close with Rabbi Isaac Sher, and he personified the godless Adam, the greatness of man, the aristocracy, that nobility of character and bearing of Slobodka throughout his life. And that also comes across in the picture. And it's also related to his walks, because supposedly this story is true. I didn't actually check this specific one, but it really matches his personality. But he was once asked if one day he merited Techiyas HaMesim after his passing. He was be brought back to life for 1 hour after having seen the world of truth and seeing what goes on in the next world. he had 1 hour to be back in this world. What would he how would he utilize his time? Would he study Torah? Would he daven? Would he study Musar, like a real Musar Talmud of Slobodka? How would he use that hour? And supposedly the answer he gave was, it really depends. If it was 7 o'clock in the morning, I would be davening. If it was 8 o'clock in the morning, I would be eating breakfast. If it would be at this and this time, I would be taking my walk. And if it would be at this and this time, I would be learning in the Beis Medrash. And he basically was conveying that he believed that his life was so in order and so scheduled, and he had worked it out, that he's doing the right thing at any given moment, that everything he was doing was Avodas Hashem. Everything he was doing was the right thing to be done at that moment. He never wasted a moment, and therefore his walk down Ocean Parkway that you described and captured in this picture is the same Avodas Hashem as far as he was concerned as his learning in the Beis Medrash. So I think that's what's brought out as well in this picture.
Very true.
Let's move to number 2.
This picture of Rav Palm was taken Purim 1987. Although the picture looks like he was posing for me for a picture, it really wasn't. It was, as they say, I captured the moment. Interesting thing about this picture is many years after I took the picture, Tarvadas honored Rav Palm, and he was like the guest of honor. And this picture was on every single lamppost in Flatbush, all over the place. And he was like, whatever. I got a lot of grief from it, but whatever. You know, he was very, very uncomfortable, not because he didn't like the picture, because it just, you know, he didn't like it, you know, his picture all over the place, plastered all over the place. This picture was, Shuvu uses this picture as, you know, because Shuvu is represented Rav Palm, so they almost like so-called inherited this picture. But no, I took the picture. It was taken on Purim 1987. I learned by Rav Palm for 6 or 7 years, but when I got smicha from Rav Palm, but this was, you know, in his class, for every Purim for his class, he would, you know, they would have like a little masiba, and across the street from the yeshiva in the Beis Medrash Cotton, as it was called, or the elementary school, I'm sorry. And look, this picture captures who Rav Palm was, always with a smile, always, how can I describe Rav Palm? I mean, you know, whoever remembers it, the glasses and the smile, and this was in his good years. You know, later on he was like, not well, whatever. Say, look, but this was Rav Palm, as they say, betokvai, who Rav Palm was. I mean, his essence, his kindness, and everything, you know, comes through in this picture. I'm sure you can give a little historical thing who Rav Palm was.
Before the historical thing, the way you're describing it, he was essentially your Rebbe.
Rav Palm was my Rebbe. He was my Masada Kedushin. He was by my kids' bris. He wasn't Sandik because I happened to have the Skalan Rebbe was the Sandik. But yeah, I learned by Rav Palm. I have smicha for Rav Palm. I learned by him. Besides the 2 or 3 years that I learned Yeridea by him, I used to go to his Chumash year, and I recorded his Chumash year for 6 or 7 years. I used to drive him all the time. So I guess you want to call it Talmud Rav Palm? Yes, I'm a Talmud Rav Palm.
So beyond this, as your hobby is taking pictures of everyone, every gadol, this is much more personal. This is someone who you felt personally connected with, and to have captured it, you know, that, like you said, the essence is much more powerful in a personal way than just in an abstract way of getting another good shot of a great man.
Yes, I mean, yes, I was very close to Rav Palm. Well, in yeshiva every single day with him, so I happened to capture this picture, but yes, I was very close to Rav Palm. It wasn't like my other pictures where I happened to be a paparazzi and I happened to capture the moment. This was, you know, every day I saw Rav Palm, you know. It was,
right. So you were still like, this was when you were still younger. You said you were by his Purim Suda. You were like, I mean, This is before
Um,
you were taking.
the-
This is probably one of your earliest ones. Before you were taking pictures.
Not the earliest ones. I would say I started taking pictures in the late 70s with a little camera. I was like a little kid. And this was like more like around 10 years later when I was like so-called an adult. This is before I was married, but I got married in 1991, so this is 1987. I was, I didn't get married very young, but I was a good, 20-something years old.
Amazing. Now, Rav Pam, first of all, is Rav Avram Yaakov HaKohen Pam. That's his full name. He actually was very proud that he had a yichus as a kohen. He said that his father had a Megillas Yuchsin, the lineage of their accurate, good family of kahuna, all the way back to Aaron HaKohen, which was lost during World War I, unfortunately, but we take his word for it. So he had that real yichus of a kohen. He, again, that radiant face, that it's an incredible to capture an image like that and that light on camera, because so many people described him like that. So many of his Talmidim described him like that. And here you see it. And if I'm not mistaken, it wasn't just used for Shuvu, it was also used on his biography.
It was used on his biography. It was used in Shuvu. It was used, Rabbi Shalom Smith wrote a bunch of Svarim. I think ArtScroll translated it, or somebody translated it, and that was on that cover. I mean, it became like, as they say, it got a life on its own. So it was originally mine, as they say.
Already, you keep on saying originally. I hope you didn't lose out because of it. Went into the public domain.
Yeah, whatever. It is what it is. Some people will be very proud that this is the picture that, if you want a picture of Pam, this is the picture of Pam. So 99% of his Talmidim have this picture on their wall, prominently displayed in various sizes. This is who Rav Pam was, and as they say, I've sold many over the years of this particular picture.
Well, why did it? You said it caused him grief when they used it on the Shuvu dinner. Why did it?
No,
or the Tarvadas dinner?
Because it was on the lamppost, and then it was torn off the lamppost when the garbage man came. It became like, I don't know. He was like a little uncomfortable with it, but he did it for the yeshiva, and the yeshiva needed for to raise the money, and then he went with a smile, and he didn't really say, but I know that it like irked him a little that it was there. Not that it was my fault, but I guess he didn't put it together. Oh, I was the one who gave him the picture that it was all over the streets. But I just know that was his personal feeling regarding that particular event, where it was all over the place. And whatever, but hopefully I didn't cause him any grief too much, and I'm sure that the dinner was fabulously successful. So I guess that gets a good ending to it.
Right. It's interesting because I think that brings it on another point. The story of the picture about him not being so comfortable that it was all over the place is that that's kind of part of his biography, is that he never wanted to be thrust into the limelight. He was very comfortable being a Rebbe in Tarvadas to Talmidim like you, and not acting on the world scene as a world Torah leader. And he was almost forced into it. He described a phone call that he received from Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky when Rabbi Yaakov was getting older, and Rabbi Yaakov was coaxing him to take a more active leadership role, take more initiative. And Rav Pam was very reluctant at first. And Rabbi Yaakov basically didn't take no for an answer. He hung up the phone on him, and he basically forced him into it. And what Rav Pam, he didn't express resentment. He took it on with the full responsibility. And it was amazing how he emerged as the public leader during the last 2 or 3 decades of his life. Once Rabbi Yaakov and other senior Torah leaders were getting older, and so he took it on fully. But he had this reluctance. He had this simplicity and modesty. He never wore a rabbinic frock. He didn't want to be in the limelight, but he did it anyway. And here the picture itself, you're saying, becomes part of that story, that here he needs to be in the limelight. His picture needs to be all over Flatbush in order to help raise funds for Torah Vodaas. And he's even willing that, like you said, the garbage men are tearing it down.
Right.
He's literally being torn down for Torah Vodaas, and that's also okay at some level, because he understands that that's what needs to be done, even if it's not the most ideal thing to do. And what's even more interesting is his legacy, because here's someone who was so modest and quiet on one hand, and so reluctant to be in the limelight on the other hand. And correct me if I'm wrong, and this is more contemporary than history, so I could be wrong. I'm never wrong in history, but it could be I'm wrong in contemporary. That Rav Pam has probably more Talmidim than anyone else who have taken active roles in communal leadership of organizations, of shuls, of yeshivas, of national organizations, of international Orthodox organizations.
Askanim.
Askanim, what we would call, but good Askanim. And he like left and right, everywhere you look at, they're almost always or very often Torah Vodaas Talmidim, and specifically students of Rav Pam. So it's incredible. I mean, someone who was so reluctant.
He was so beloved. It's beyond comprehension. They loved him. They just loved him, and they would do anything, to help him and to make him happy, whatever it was. Those were. And there's a certain thing that when you see a Talmud Rav Pam, you could tell that by the person what he does, that that he's a Talmud Rav Pam. It's just a certain amount of Ma'ur Bein Habriyas, not aloof, just nice guys. They're just nice. Each one mentioned, and that's what he inculcated into his Talmidim.
Right.
I mean, there's many examples of it, but you could tell that Talmud Rav Pam stands out, unique.
As his product.
Yes. Amazing.
Okay, let's move on to number 3. So here we have the Bluzhever Rebbe, Rabbi Yisrael Spira, the great and holy Rebbe of Bluzhev in Galicia. He himself lived in Lvov for many years. I gotta say, and I said this about a lot of your pictures last year, and I think this about a lot of your pictures in general, but this is one of my favorites, and just from everything about it, and I want to elaborate on what about the Bluzhever Rebbe and all that. But first, I want to hear when you took the picture, how you took the picture.
First of all, I'm just curious, because it happens to be that I happen to have a friendly with a few Bluzhever Hasidim, and they go crazy. It's I've taken many pictures. But for some reason, I'm not exactly sure. I assume every person has what they like about this picture, but they go crazy about this picture. A Bluzhever Chassid tells me, he says the way the Rebbe's fingers are, that's how he has etched in his mind. I mean, I don't know if you ever saw the Bluzhever Rebbe, but this was their memory of him, and the picture, it just captures the way they remember him. But you're the third person who told me that this is their favorite picture. This picture, I think, was taken in 1986 or 1987. I'm not 100% sure. It was taken Hoshana Rabbah, and Hoshana Rabbah was a Rebbe happening for me. I would run from one place to another because not everybody was on the same schedule. In Bar Park, I would run to Babiv, I would run to Amshnov, or whatever, and happened to be there. I happened to run in here. Apparently, it was the time that they were either it was Hoshana's time, going around. I don't remember exactly what time it was, but he was sitting there. It was open, and I just took the picture. And there was this one picture that I took, and then that was it. I mean, I guess you could see, from historically, I'm sure the yarmulke that he's wearing is probably from the Bnei Yissaschar, if not Bnei Yissaschar, the Tefillah Tzaddik, somebody from his, I'm not exactly sure who it's from.
I'm not sure either, but it's one of those that you said, yeah.
Yeah, it's probably one of those. and it's a Shana Rabbah, as you know, as holy of a time as it is. I mean, I guess you would say Yom Kippur, but I guess I couldn't picture Yom Kippur. And this, as I said before, captures who he was, and more than that, I can't say. Like you said, it's a great picture, and I have to be there at the right moment.
Yeah, it's really amazing. And this was like, I'm not even familiar with the whole Borough Park scene. There's like a Bluzhever Stiebel. That's where he ran his whole chutzner.
On 57th Street or 58th Street between 13th and 14th, between 14th and 15th Avenue. A little small Stiebel over there. I mean, the Stiebel in my mind is famous because if you remember, there's a famous picture of the Satmar Rebbe, a black and white picture of the Satmar Rebbe walking down the stairs in Borough Park. That was coming out of the Bluzhever Stiebel. It happened to be the Bluzhever Rebbe's grandson's Pidyon Haben, and the Satmar Rebbe was there, and the famous Harry Trainer picture of him walking down the stairs. So that was the Bluzhever Stiebel. I'm not even sure if they're still there. Maybe they just threw it down and they built something else over there. I don't know. There's a few Bluzhever Rebbes today, grandchildren, whether it's the Ribbitich, Bluzhev, I don't remember what they call themselves, but that's the Stiebel that I took the picture in.
And it was never a big, huge one. It was never.
No, they had it, and they had Bluzhever Hasidim, whatever. They had 100 people, and then it wasn't a very big shul. And he was happy with that. He didn't need, he was happy doing whatever he was doing. He also was not interested in people running after him or whatever. He did what he did, and not interested in the fanfare or whatever. And that's where I captured the picture.
So it is amazing. I mean, he's someone who passed away at the age 100, 2 or 3 years after you took the picture. So he lived for a full century. The picture's when he's 97, 98, something like that. And he, besides for living through a century, he lives through the Jewish 20th century, which is the most momentous and in many ways tragic century in Jewish history. And he goes through all that. He's someone who probably more than any other famous rabbinic personality went through the war and the Holocaust through 6 full years. He was in Poland. He was not in Hungary or any other place. So he went it from beginning to end. And the miracle of his life and his rebuilding on a small scale, like you said, he doesn't make a place of big maestas, a lot of his institutions and thousands of Hasidim and a huge base managed. But that rebuilding, there's so much to see in that picture itself. Those sunken eyes and the yarmulke of his ancestors, of either the Dinavar, the Bnei Yissaschar, or the Tzilat Tzaddik, or whoever it was. I'll tell you what, like personally, when I think of this picture, is I try to think, what is he thinking of? What's going through his mind? There's something there of this holiness, this concentration. What is he, what's going through his mind, his holy mind at this time on Hoshana Rabbah, with his kittel and the gartel and the talis, and it just gives this whole scene. He was in Lvov at the war's outbreak. He goes through the Lvov ghetto, which was a terrible place. He's later at the Yanovska Road Camp, which is, in Holocaust historiography, there are researchers who dislike referring to Yanovska as a concentration camp, because since so many people were killed there, it's not even fair to classify it as a concentration camp. They want to reclassify it as a death center, a death camp, and not as a concentration. That's how horrible Yanovska was. And he survives Yanovska. He was even on a train to Belzhitz, which was a real death camp where no one survived, but he was sent back from Belzhitz to sort the clothing of recent victims. So he was in the furnace of death itself. He is then transported to other camps, ends up at Bergen-Belsen towards the end of the war. He went through it from beginning to end. Not only that, he loses his wife and family. After the war, you mentioned that his children and grandchildren became rebels. It was his second marriage. He had adopted children. He had real children from his second marriage. His wife was a survivor who had lost her husband and her family. And it's like...
I don't think he had children from his second wife.
was just the adopted children?
It was his wife's children.
His wife's
He
children.
never, I mean, you have to understand, I mean, he, at the wartime, you're talking about he was in his 50s.
Right, that's
So,
another
he wasn't a
point.
young man.
Most survivors were either child survivors hidden, but most survivors of the
Right.
camps were in their 20s, teens, 20s, maybe 30s. And here he was in his
Right,
mid
he was older.
50s during the war. And he somehow survived. And some of the greatest Holocaust and inspirational Holocaust stories that I relate over to groups in Europe is about him.
I think Yafa Eliach interviewed him.
Yes, Yafael, the late Yafael, the great Holocaust survivor herself,
Right.
child
Interviewed
survivor.
him personally.
He granted her interviews. It was also not a very typical thing. A big Hasidic Rebbe granting Holocaust interviews to a female Holocaust researcher, and she interviewed him extensively. In other words, she sat for several sessions where she went through his whole story with him. They are from the most accurate stories in Hasidic tales of the Holocaust, which she wrote. Some of the other stories in there are a bit questionable, but his stories are impeccable. They come straight from the Blujever Rebbe's mouth, and of course many other ones come from his wife, his second Rebbitzin. A few in particular that stand out by me is when he, in Yanovskarot camp, he was the sadistic assessed one of the things that they did to them there. So at one point they were forced to jump across a ditch, and it seemed to be physically impossible to jump across for a healthy man, maybe for an Olympic sprinter. And here there's people who were starved, who were malnutrition, diseased, beaten, tortured, broken, and they were expected to jump across this ditch. And they're standing there, and anyone who would fall in would be shot, and this would be their way of basically carrying out a selectia of who's still fit to work. Because if they're physically able to get across the ditch, then we can keep them for slave labor for a short time longer. And the fellow standing next to the Blujever Rebbe, before he jumps, he says, "How are we going to make it, Rebbe? How can we jump? We can't jump." So he says, "I have no idea. I don't know how we're going to do it. We just have got to try and jump and close our eyes and rely on Hashem, and we'll make it." And he says Shema, or he says Vidui, or he says something, and he makes the jump. The next thing is he opens his eyes and he finds himself on the other side of the ditch. He looks around and he sees his partner, the one who started off with him, also still standing next to him. And this fellow says to him, "Rebbe, how did you do it?" And he says, "I closed my eyes and I held on to the coattails of my great ancestors, of my father, of the Tzila Tzaddik, of the Bnei Yissaschar of Dinov, of the Noam Elimelech, of Lezhensk, of all my great tzaddikim ancestors. I held on to their coattails, and they schlepped me across, and that's how I ended up across." But how did you get across? And the guy standing next to him says, "I held on to you. That's how I got across."
Yeah.
And that story it blows my mind each time, because that's Jewish history. How do we get across life? How do we get across our 2,000-year exile? How do we get across the challenges of raising children and of making a living and of collectively as the Jewish nation? How do we get across history? And we did it by holding on to the coattails. We're not letting go of our past, not letting go of our ancestors, not letting go of our tzaddikim, as far as his partner is concerned, not letting go of who are near and dear to us, of everything that we come from. And we hold so strong onto our past, and that gets us across the ditch. We don't fall into the ditch when we hold on so tight and don't let go. So that was a great story. There's another one. It's quite a famous one. It was towards the end of the war, when he's in Bergen-Belsen, and in his barracks, a few broken Jews come together. They try to light Hanukkah candles on the first night of Hanukkah. I think they took either shoe polish or some margarine from their starvation rations, and they made a wick out of their sleeve or something, and they honor him in lighting this wick on the first night of Hanukkah. and he recites the first bracha, Asher Kedishanim Seisvan Lahadlik Ner Shel Chanukah, and he recites the second bracha, Sha'asa Nisim Laveseinu Bayom Mahem B'Zman Hazeh. And then he stops, and he turns around, and he waits a few seconds, and he doesn't say anything, and then he turns back around, and he says the third bracha for the first night, Shechiyanu V'Kimanu V'Giyanu Lazman Hazeh, and they light it. And a few minutes later, of course, they put it out because the SS might come and they're nervous, and life goes on. And someone approaches the Bluzhever Rebbe, who's an irreligious Jew, not affiliated, but he knows who the Rebbe is, and he says, Rebbe, I respect that you wanted to do a religious act and you wanted to maintain a religious identity because that's preserving our humanity and our identity and our Jewishness in these terrible times. And the Nazis are trying to dehumanize us, and we're showing that we're still alive. We can do it. So I have even if I'm irreligious and I don't believe in it, I respect that you did it. And I'm happy to participate. And I even understand how you made those first two blessings. You're blessing about the mitzvah. You're making another blessing about the nisim, the miracles that were once done to us. But how dare you make that third blessing? Shechiyanu v'kiyimanu v'giyanu lazman hazeh. You're happy that we're alive today? We're 5.5 years into this terrible war. We've all lost our families. We're going to get killed. We're for sure not going to survive. What are you happy about? And the Bluzhever Rebbe tells him, I agree with you. I did not want to recite this bracha either. I don't think it was appropriate. And I turned around and I paused because I knew there was a rabbi of a town in Hungary in our barracks, and I wanted to ask him, is it even permitted to recite this bracha? Because no one's happy that we're here and alive today. Just like you said. But you know what I saw when I turned around? I saw hundreds of pairs of eyes looking at me with anticipation, with a hishtoikikus, with an excitement that even in Bergen-Belsen, even after everything we've been through, even after everything we lost, we're still waiting to light the Hanukkah candle. And I said, that's I'm excited to see that the Jewish spirit has never been crushed. And again, that's when I see that, I think of this story also. And the last thing is that you went into Beis Medrash in Borough Park. Borough Park is in New York City in the United States of America. When he grew up, and he was in his mid-50s, like we said, when the war broke out. And he grew up in the old world of Galicia, in the world of the Divrei Chaim of Tzanz, of the Bnei Yissaschar of Dinov, of the old Galician Polish Hasidus. He never imagined that he would one day be in this urban American materialistic environment, attempting to rebuild a Hasidus with a new family. He would never have dreamed of it. But when he was pulling into a ship, New York Harbor, 1946, he was one of the first groups of survivors to arrive as refugees after the war. And he comes into New York Harbor, and he's standing on the deck alone with just a shirt on his back, no money, no family, no anything. As someone who had a community of Hasidim before the war, someone who had so much and lost everything, lost literally everything. It can't even be described how much he lost. And there's an American sailor, a non-Jewish sailor, who's standing on the deck, and he says to him, Rabbi, you see, that's the Statue of Liberty. And that's a welcoming to all immigrants, to refugees. There's even a poem authored by a Jewish woman, Emma Lazarus, at the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free, and so on. And you're welcome here. Rabbi, you can start again with everything that was destroyed in your life. You can start again in the United States. And the Bluzhever Rebbe starts to cry. And he says, thank you, Mr. Sailor, for welcoming. There's one place in the world that will allow Jews to come, that will welcome Jews in. But I have to make one correction. Huddled masses, there are no huddled masses anymore. There are a few individuals. And it's up to those individuals to go ahead and rebuild what was lost. And he saw himself as one of those individuals, that here, there is no more huddled masses, but these individuals are yearning to be free and to rebuild the Yiddishkeit. And he did. He did. And he remained it as individuals. He didn't build the big masses of Hasidus. He did it as individuals, but his impact was in so many individuals, even if well beyond the world of Luzher Chassidim. So many people were touched by his life and his actions and his leadership. I believe that the Siyam Hashas, which is till today dedicated to the memory of the 6 million Kedoshim who were lost or were killed in the war, is because of his initiative. He pushed for that the Siyam Hashas should be in their memory. It's one of many things that were his impact. So he really is someone special, and I think that that 100 years of history that he lived is written on his face in that picture that you were able to get on that Hoshana Rabbah. Let's go to number 4. So here we have the previous Skolena. Now it's 2 previous. The old Skolena Rebbe, Rabbi Eliezer Zusha, Portugal, who was the rabbi in Skolen in Romania. So what's the story of this picture? Later, soon we're going to show the picture of his son, who succeeded him as the Rebbe, Rabbi Yisrael Avram, Portugal. So it's the father and son duo who are the Skolena Rebbes, leaders of Romanian Jewry, both in Romania and later in the United States. What is your connection to Skolen, and how did you come to take these pictures of the father and the son?
Okay, so first of all, this picture was taken by a grandson's wedding in Williamsburg. What year did he pass away? 82. This was
I remember it was in the
82, 83. Yeah, so this was like 81, whatever. And this is under the chuppah. He, at the end of his life, he was pretty much blind. He could not see. And usually when I take pictures with a flash, it just happens to be, I get a lot of people who are screaming at me, whatever. And, you know, for him, it didn't really bother him. He didn't see it anyway, so nobody really said anything. This was by a grandson's wedding, and I was just, you know, lucky to, I took a bunch of pictures over there at that time. It was like the first time that I really had a good camera and took, you know, very nice pictures of him. My so-called relationship with Skolen comes from my grandfather, Rabbi Tzvi Bronstein, or they call him Harry Bronstein. He was very big, Askin. He went many times to Russia. He had an organization called Altidom. He was a Mayo, but he was very instrumental in taking out the Skolena Rebbe and his son from Romania. He was in jail at that time. It's how it came about. My grandfather used to sell on the side. He used to sell Carmel wine. This may sound insane, but he sold Carmel wine, and at that time, Romania produced Slivovitz, one of these brandies or one of these things, and at that time,
I can't stand Slivovitz, by the way.
Oh, okay. So they had something that they produced over there in Romania, and at that time, Romania didn't have a certain status in the United Nations, whatever. So my grandfather helped, and they brought Romania to something status. They gave him a certain status that you were able to import things from Romania. So because of that, it was very involved with a lot of different things. But anyway, so the Skolena Rebbe was in Romania and was in jail, and my grandfather sent matzahs over there. There's a whole story how the Skolena Rebbe, how he was in jail. As a matter of fact, the Skolena Rebbe, every Chamisha by Tu B'Av, every year he makes Imlav Malka. It's called the Suda Seidah. And every year, I'm talking about from the old Skolena Rebbe to the past one who passed away, Yisrael Avram's son, and even many Skolena Rebbes today, every Suda Seidah, they talk about my grandfather. Because my grandfather, besides the fact that the Rebbe said he sent matzahs and sugar, it was just something they were like dying for, but he felt that the biggest bracha, the biggest major nace that he saw was the same person who was torturing him, actually torturing the Skolena Rebbe. He was forced to give him this matzah and the sugar. So for him, it was like a big thing. So every Suda Seidah, by Tu B'Av, they would speak about it. As a matter of fact, by every Seder, by Pesach night, by the Seder, all of the Rebbes, they all spoke about my grandfather, Reb Herschel Bronstein, how he helped them, and they never forgot, which is amazing. As a matter of fact, every yard site when my grandfather, his yard site was Yud Aleph Nissen, for the last, 20 years, after he passed away, I would go over to Skulen Rebbe to get a bracha, and he would talk about my grandfather, whatever. It happens to be that my Sadik was this Skulen Rebbe that Rebbe Les Zusia.
Wow.
My son Sadik, my son Tzvi, who's named after my grandfather, his Sadik was the pastor Rebbe who passed away. So I will call it that. And my grandfather helped the Skulen Rebbe even when he came to America. He helped him with his apartment. He helped them, getting, a new immigrant coming. He helped them a lot. So Skulen has a lot of akara types to my grandfather, and I guess so. I felt always a connection to the Skulen Rebbe. So this picture was taken, like I said, by the Chasana, and of course you'll see the next picture is taken of the son. But so we do have a lot of shaykhs to Skulen.
Amazing. That's beautiful. It sounds like a good close relationship, and to understand what your grandfather did, it's worth noting that the Skulen Rebbe, like I mentioned, was in Romania. So he was a Talmud of some of the Rizhiner branches in Romania. Sadiger wasn't really in Romania, but he was a chassid of the Sadiger Rebbe, and then a Bohush Rebbe, who was really in Romania, a real Romanian chassidus, and he's the rabbi of Skulen. He was not from he wasn't a Hasidic dynasty. He was a chassid of big rebbes, and then he was the rabbi in Skulen, and he emerges as a rebbe. So I guess we would call it an authentic rebbe. He didn't inherit it. He really becomes this leader of Hasidim, and he's one of the only people. The Ribnitz Rebbe also, not very many people who are Hasidic rebbes who remain behind under a communist regime after surviving the Holocaust, going through the Holocaust as a survivor, and then staying in Eastern Europe, in the place where the Holocaust took place, but more so under a communist regime, an atheist, anti-religious communist regime, where preaching religion and teaching it to the youth can be a crime. And he stays. And he's the inspiration for Romanian survivors who stayed behind in Romania. He has an active base medrash. And I know about children and grandchildren of other Romanian survivors who stayed in Romania after the war, who their only way of continuing any form of Yiddishkeit, of any Judaism, behind the Iron Curtain, it wasn't technically in the Soviet Union, but it was behind the Iron Curtain in the communist sense, was their affiliation with the Skulen Rebbe during the
I think he only had this one son, who was the last one who passed away, but he adopted many children. A lot of the Yisraelim that
he took care of a lot.
He took a lot of
Holocaust orphans. Yeah.
He was like their father. As a matter of fact, many years later, when they married themselves and they married off children, Skulen Rebbe used to come to all their weddings, and because they were like children.
Amazing.
They were his father's children. Yeah.
And very beautiful songs were composed by both of the last Rebbes, and one of them he composed during the Holocaust, about a whole long thing, which I of course don't even know the words, and definitely would not sing, because people are supposed to be enjoying the Amudim event, not being upset at it. So, but it was a very haunting song, very haunting tune, very powerful words, and it included the cry of the imprisoned, the Enkas Asir, during the Holocaust. And that then in the 1950s, at one point, Romanian government allowed a Jewish delegation to visit Romania to see that Jews are not being prosecuted. There's no oppression of religious life. There's no suppression of Jewish life in Romania, and it was all a sham, because any meeting of this American delegation was with local Romanian Jews, was with communist officials in the room.
Right.
And they knew they would get punished if they said everything was censored. And the Skulen Rebbe is one of the leaders of Romanian Jewry in the 1950s, was chosen as a member of the Romanian delegation, and he was racking his brains. How am I going to convey to the free world? This is a one-time chance. We're going to have this meeting. How can I convey to the free world that things are really, really bad? And what he decided to do is he asked the communist officials if he can sing them a song in Hebrew that he had composed under Nazi oppression during the Holocaust. Okay, Nazis are bad, right? You know, so you're singing it, no problem. So he sings that song, but he changes one part of the song. The words Enkas Asir, he changed into this cry, Enkas Asir. He like screamed it almost. And until today, when they sing the song of the Skulener Rebbe, it's, again, I'm not going to sing it because I'm just going to mess it up, but it's screamed, Enkas Asir, the cry of the oppressed. And the American delegation understood right away that there's an Enkas Asir, that he's screaming out for help because it's not easy to live as a Jew in communist Romania. And that leads, this chain of events leads to your grandfather eventually, after he's arrested, it's after he's in jail actually, later, in 1960, getting him out. And here we have his son. So right. The father of Eliezer Zusha, Portugal, we saw before. And here we have Rabbi Yisrael Avram, Portugal, the next Skulener Rebbe, who takes over his father, and he takes his father's legacy in the Chesed LaAvram organization, which his father established to help the needy, to help the downtrodden, the children from dysfunctional homes, from abusive homes, from, you know, with parents in jail. In other words, the ones that society would have neglected. He took those as his Hasidim. That's the people he's taken care of. And he built homes for them and got them help.
Married them off and
paid for their weddings, and Yisrael Avram Portugal used to go around fundraising for it. In fact, I grew up in Monsey, so of course I remember the Vizhnitzer Rebbe and the Skver Rebbe, but one of the first encounters that I remember with a Hasidic Rebbe was at the Skulener Rebbe, because he came for a fundraiser, and the way it was marketed to us was, come to see the Skulener Rebbe. Of course, he's also going to ask for money, but you're coming to see this big tzaddik, the Skulener Rebbe. And I'm the 7-year-old kid in Forshay, and he says to me, "What's this? Your chup. You need to cut that off."
That was his famous thing.
Yeah,
he worried about the chup, and if somebody had like a TV in their house, so but he was consistent. It's not as if when he came to a rich person's house, he would not say anything. No, if the kid was the rich person who's giving them who knows how much money, his kid has a big chup, he would say, you have to take off the chup. It's not good. The bleepus or whatever. He had all very interesting. It happens to be that this picture, yes, it is a Skulener Rebbe, but this picture, believe it or not, was taken by the Hanochas Even Hapina of Yeshivas Torah Tamima.
Wow.
Yeah, so this was on Ocean Parkway, where the Torah Tamima building was built many years later. And he happened to, he was there. It happens to be that this picture, it's interesting because if you look at the picture, you could tell that is when he was much younger, because after, when he was older, he would let his payas down. And here he has the payas around his ears, so I guess people, Skuleners, know exactly the erech what time it was taken. But this was a classic picture, beautiful picture of the Skulener Rebbe. I took many, many pictures of the Skulener Rebbe. I used to take pictures by all the dinners. I mean, they would hire me, whatever. I was many times in the Rebbe's house. Since I knew, Rav Herschel Grunstein's grandson, so, they were like so-called more free with me. More access, yeah. And I knew him, I knew the Rebbitzin, whatever. I was like very close over there.
It's amazing. And he looked so regal. He had this Hadras Panim. He has this
beautiful Hadras Panim. Yeah, and he also used to compose many, many songs. A lot of times I used to see him and he would sit there with a tape recorder, always near him, just in case he thought of a song, and he would tape it and play it back and improve on it. Like very
wow, I didn't know that. And he had this. His base bench was in Borough Park.
His base bench was on Borough Park on 54th Street between 13th and 14th Avenue for many, many years. Not a big base measure. In the later years, they expanded a little, whatever. But he used to daven very late, and sometimes they would be standing on the street to chap somebody who didn't daven shachos yet, and we're talking about later in the day, whatever. He didn't really have many people. Later years, of course, then he had, a lot more people, but in the beginning, even his father used to live in Crown Heights, and many times he would daven in 770 because just to daven to get a minyan, because he really didn't he had nothing. He didn't have anything in Crown Heights.
Wow, so 770 was home to Sklen also. Well, he was a Rebbe under communism, so that would fit well with Lubavitch. The fighting for Yiddishkeit under communism.
Yeah. But I'm just saying because he didn't, not because of Lubavitch, but more because
because he didn't have a
minyan.
Yeah. Wow. So I also like it because, especially this picture, because he looks very Rebbish. He has this beautiful beard, and it's the silver cane, which is like a classic Rebbe look. And those, I don't even know what they're called, those sleeves where you have the velvet on the sleeves. That's also a very Rebbish thing.
Yeah.
And the beard and the payas, the whole thing, it looks, and therefore, if it's in color, you could say, wow, this is 20th century classic Rebbe. And if it would have been in black and white, you would have said 19th century classic Rebbe.
Right.
And under communism, there's no such thing as a classic Rebbe because he couldn't have looked like that. I guarantee you that he or his father didn't have a silver cane and velvet beketcha walking through the streets in Romania in the 1950s. He probably couldn't afford it, and he probably would have been dangerous too. And I'm just imagining here. I'm not stating anything that I know.
Right? No. I'm sure not. He definitely wasn't in the open. You had to do everything hidden over there. It was a different world. Even though that it was a lot later. It was till 1960. We're not talking about somebody. Yeah, so it's 20 years later in the Holocaust. But very oppressed over there.
And so behind the facade of this regal bearing lies all those Romanian years where he was the same exact Rebbe, the same exact leader, the same exact caring for Hasidim, but without the external trappings. And therefore the external trappings is not what makes the Rebbe. It's who he is what makes the Rebbe.
Yes. That's who he was. Special person, very special person.
Yeah. Okay, I think we'll wrap it up for now. This was a pleasure, Schus. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Rav Moshe, for again another wonderful session. Your pictures are lighting up the world, giving us so much knowledge, so much inspiration, so many stories, so many things to light up our lives with what you were able to. I don't know if you imagined that when you were taking these pictures back then, that it would have such an impact on the wider society at that time.
Yeah, definitely didn't at that time, and I'm happy to see that many Jewish homes have my pictures hanging, and people are enjoying it.
Yes, and thank you, Amudim, for giving us this platform for the special event of Behind the Camera, Part 2, and wishing you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you.